Chapter 14 The First Miracle. Matilda sat down again at her desk. The Trunchbull seated herself behind the teacher's table. It was the first time she had sat down during the whole lesson. She reached out a hand and took a hold of the water jug, still holding the jug by the handle, not lifting it yet. She said, "I have never been able to understand why small children are so disgusting. They are the bane of my life. They are like insects. They should be got rid of as early as possible. You get rid of flies with fly spray by hanging up fly paper. I have often thought of inventing a spray to get rid of small children. How splendid would it be to walk into this classroom with a gigantic spray gun in my hand and start pumping it? Or better still, come with some huge strips of sticky paper. I would hang them around the school, and you'd all get stuck to them. That would be the end of it." "Wouldn't that be a good idea, Miss Honey? If it's meant to be a joke, Headmistress, I don't think it's a very funny one," Miss Honey said from the back of the class. "You wouldn't you?" Miss Honey said. The Trunchbull said, "And it is not meant to be a joke. My idea of a perfect school, Miss Honey, is one that has no children in it at all. One of these days, I shall start up a school like that, and I think it will be very successful." "The woman's mad," Miss Honey was telling herself. "She is the round of the twists. She is one who ought to be got rid of." The Trunchbull now lifted a large blue porcelain water jug and poured some water into a glass, and suddenly, with the water, came out a long, slimy newt straight into the glass. Plop! The Trunchbull let out a yell and leapt out of her chair, as though a firecracker had gone on underneath her. And now the children saw a long, thin, slimy, yellow lizard-like creature squirming and jumped about, as well as shouting, "What is it? Oh, it's disgusting! It's a snake! It's a baby crocodile! It's an alligator! Look out, Miss Trunchbull!" cried Lavender. "I'll bet it bites." The Trunchbull, this mighty female giant, stood there in her green breeches, quivering like a blank mage. She was especially furious that someone had succeeded in making her jump and yell like that, because she prided herself on toughness. She started at the curious creature twisting and wriggling in the glass. Curiously enough, she had never seen a newt before. Natural history was not her strong point. She hadn't the faintest idea what the thing was, and it certainly looked extremely unpleasant. Slowly she sat down again in her chair, and she looked, at this moment, more terrifying than ever before. The fires of fury and hatred were smoldering in her small black eyes. "Matilda," she barked, "stand up." "Who, me?" Matilda said. "What have I done?" "Stand up, you disgusting little cockroach." "I haven't done anything, Miss Trunchbull. I honestly haven't. I've never seen that slimy thing before." "Stand up at once, you filthy little maggot." Reluctantly, Matilda got to her feet. She was in the second row. Lavender was in the row behind her, feeling a bit guilty. She hadn't intended to get her friend in trouble. On the other hand, she was certainly not about to own up. "You are a vile, repulsive, repellent, malicious little brute," the Trunchbull was shouting. "You are not fit to be in the school. You ought to be behind bars. That's where you ought to be. I shall have you dumped out of this establishment in utter disgrace. I shall have the prefects chase you down the corridor, out of the front door, with hockey sticks. I shall have the staff escort you home under armed guard, and then I shall make absolutely sure you are sent to a reformatory for delinquent girls, and for a minimum of 40 years. The Trunchbull was in such a rage that her face had boiled to the color of little flecks of flaw at the corners of her mouth. But she was not the only one who was losing her cool. Matilda was also beginning to see the red. She didn't in the least mind being accused of having done something that she'd actually done. She didn't mind being accused of something that she'd actually done. She could see the justice of that, but it was being accused of a crime that she had definitely not committed. She had absolutely nothing to do with the beastly creature in the glass. And by golly, she thought, that rotten Trunchbull isn't going to pin that on me. No, I did not, she screamed. Oh, yes, you did, the Trunchbull roared back. Nobody else could have thought of a trick like that. Your father was right to warn me about you. The woman seemed to have lost control of herself completely. She was ranting on like a maniac. You're finished in this school, young lady, she shouted. You're finished everywhere. I shall personally see to it that you are put away in a place where not even the crows can land their droppings on you. You will probably never see the light of day again. I'm telling you, I didn't do it, Matilda screamed. I've never seen a creature like that in my life. You put a crocodile in my drinking water, the Trunchbull yelled back at her. There is no worse crime in the world. Now sit down and don't say a word. Go on, sit down at once. I'm telling you, Matilda shouted, refusing to sit down. I'm telling you to shut up, the Trunchbull roared. If you don't shut up at once and sit down, I shall remove my belt and let you have it with the end that has the buckle. Slowly Matilda sat down. Oh, the rottenness of it all, the unfairness. How dare they expel her for something she hadn't done? Matilda felt herself getting angrier and angrier and angrier. Felt unbearably angry that something was bound to explode inside her head very soon. The newt was still squirming in a tall glass of water, and it looked horribly uncomfortable. The glass was not big enough for it. Matilda glared at the Trunchbull. How she hated her. She glared at the glass with the newt in it, and she longed to march up, grab the glass, and tip the contents with the newt all over the Trunchbull's head. She screamed. She trembled to think of what the Trunchbull would do to her if she did that. The Trunchbull was sitting behind the teacher's table, staring with a mixture of horror and fascination at the newt wriggling in the glass. Matilda's eyes were also riveted on the glass, and now quite slowly there began to creep over Matilda a most extraordinary and peculiar feeling. The feeling was mostly in the eyes. A kind of electricity seemed to be gathering inside them. A sense of power was brewing in those eyes of hers. A feeling of great strength was settling itself deep inside her eyes. But there was another feeling, something else altogether, which she could not understand. It was like flashes of lightning. Little waves of lightning seemed to be flashing out of her eyes. Her eyeballs were beginning to get hot, as though vast energy was building up somewhere inside them. It was an amazing sensation. She kept her eyes steadily on the glass, and now her eyes were concentrating itself on one small part of each eye growing stronger and stronger. It felt as though a million tiny little invisible arms with hands on them were shooting out of her eyes towards the glass and staring at it. Tip it, Matilda whispered. Tip it over. She saw the glass wobble. It actually tilted backwards, a fraction of an inch. Then it realigned itself. She kept pushing at it with those millions of invisible arms and hands reaching from her eyes and feeling the power that was flashing straight from those two little black dots in the very centers of her eyeballs. Tip it, she whispered again. Tip it over. Once more the glass wobbled. She pushed harder, still willing her eyes to shoot out more power, and then very, very slowly, so slowly she could hardly even see it happen, the glass began to lean backwards, farther and farther and farther backwards, until it was leaning just on the edge of its base, and then it teetered for a few seconds before finally toppling over and falling with a sharp tinkle onto the desktop with water in it. The squirming newt splashed out all over Miss Trunchbull's enormous bosom, and the headmistress let out a yell that must have rattled every window pane in the building. And for a second in time, the last 5 minutes, she shot out of the chair like a rocket, and you clutched desperately at the cotton smock where it covered the great chest, and it clung there, little claw-like feet. The Trunchbull looked down and saw it, and she bellowed, even louder. With a swipe of her hand, she sent the creature flying across the classroom. It landed on the floor beside Lavender's desk, and very quickly she ducked down, picked it up, and put it in her pencil box for another time. A newt, she decided, was a useful thing to have around. The Trunchbull, her face more like a boiled ham than ever, was standing before the class, quivering with fury. Her massive bosom was heaving in and out, and the splash of water down her front made a dark, wet patch that had probably soaked right through to her skin. "Who did it?" she roared. "Come on up! Own up! Step forward! You won't escape this time. Whoever's responsible for this dirty job, who pushed this glass?" "Nobody," answered the whole room. The whole room remained a silent tomb. "Matilda!" she roared. "It was you. I know it was you." Matilda in the second row sat very still and said nothing. A strange feeling of serenity and confidence was sweeping over her, and all of a sudden she found that she was frightened by nobody in the world. With this power of her eyes alone, she compelled a glass of water to tip and spill its contents all over the horrible headmistress, who could speak and do anything. "Speak up, you clotted carbuncle," roared the Trunchbull. "Admit it, you did it." Matilda looked right back into the flashing eyes of the infuriated female giant with total calmness. "I have not moved from my desk, Miss Trunchbull, since the lesson began. I can say no more." Suddenly the entire class seemed to rise up against the headmistress. "She didn't move," they cried out. "Matilda didn't move. Nobody moved. You must have knocked it over yourself." "I most certainly did not knock it over myself. How dare you suggest such a thing?" "Speak up, Miss Honey. You must have seen everything. Who knocked over my glass?" "None of the children did, Miss Trunchbull," Miss Honey answered. "I can vouch for that. Nobody has moved from his or her desk in the time you have been here, except for Nigel, and he has not moved from this corner." Miss Trunchbull glared at Miss Honey. Miss Honey met her gaze without flinching. "I am telling you the truth, headmistress," she said. "You must have knocked it over without knowing it. That sort of thing is easy to do. But I am fed up with you bunch of useless midgets," the Trunchbull roared. "I refuse to waste any more of my precious time in here." And with that she marched out of the classroom, slamming the door behind her. In stunned silence that followed, Miss Honey walked up to the front of the classroom, stood behind the table. "Phew," she said. "I think we have had enough of school for today, don't you? The class is dismissed. You may all go out in the playground and wait for your parents to come and take you home."